Welcome to the S.O.A.P video series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We have come to the point where we're starting a brand new book, brand new series.
Ooh.
You know, sometimes they're a little bit longer than others, sometimes
Yeah.
they're shorter. This is going to be a shorter one. We're only going to take
4
4
weeks.
sessions,
Yeah.
4 weeks to go through it.
I heard it's the best book in the
It
Bible.
is absolutely got the best name in
I
the
had to get that
whole
in before
Bible.
he got it in.
It is.
So what are we going to be talking about?
This is the book of Gary. Oh no, sorry. This is the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel.
Great.
So yes, I have read it many, many times, and I've memorized a lot of sections in there. And you know, there's it's really cool because the first half is mostly historical narrative, with a little bit of predictive prophecy. The second half is mostly predictive prophecy with a little bit of historical narrative.
Nice.
So it's really interesting. Ton of stuff in this book that we're going to try to survey through.
Yeah. So what's the most famous story?
Well, you've got the lion's den, of course,
Yeah, I think
right?
so too.
And the furnace. I think the fiery furnace with
Yeah.
the 3 guys.
Yeah.
I think those are probably.
But I think Daniel and the lion's den, and like we were talking before, most people when you picture it, you picture either a young adult or a young kid, you know, in a hole with a bunch of lions around.
Yep.
I've always seen it with the lions asleep, and he's like tiptoeing around type of deal.
I've seen some.
And we're going to learn that's not true.
Yeah, I've seen some where Daniel's there, and the lions are either asleep or they're sedated or something, or they're all roaring. I've seen one where they're all really loud and roaring, and there's an angel standing there, holding them back.
Yeah.
But yeah, Daniel's always pictured as a young man, either teen 20s, 30s, maybe something, right?
Yep. Now you're talking about the historical narrative in here, and I think it's important, especially at the very beginning. We gotta walk through what's going on.
Yeah.
For Daniel to make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I think what's really cool is the background of Daniel shows up in a number of books.
Yeah.
Right. Shows up in First King, Second King, First Chronicle, Second Chronicle. That's 4 books, plus Daniel. But the whole idea is we're at the time of kings, right?
Yeah.
And God is telling the nation of Israel, don't leave me, don't leave me. And of course, they continue to leave, right? And so shortly after Solomon's reign, right? So we're on the 3rd king, King Solomon. You know, everything is going great. As soon as he dies and it goes to his kid, right? There's a break, right? And we have the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom,
right?
And then basically what happens is over time this northern kingdom was worse, and the Assyrians came in and wiped them out.
Well, took them out. Took them exile into Assyria, right?
Yeah, if they didn't kill them,
right?
So now we're left with this southern kingdom, and that's kind of where our story takes place. So where are we at here? We're about 605 BC.
So that we're talking about 115 years or so after Assyria takes the northern kingdom. Judah, because that's the main tribe in the southern. Judah is about 115 years later, and they're still going downhill.
Right.
But about 605 BC is what we're talking here.
Yeah. So now at this time we have a king in a place called, let's see, I got to do it backwards, Babylon, right? And he is fighting with Egypt, and he's a prince at this point.
Right. He's not king yet.
Yeah. So he's not king yet. So he makes his way past this town called Jerusalem, goes off to Egypt and fights, ends up winning. At some point on his way back, he hears that his father died, which means he's the eminent king, right? He's going to be the king. So he's got to go back and get his kingship. Well, he's passing by Jerusalem, Judah, what's left of Israel, and he decides to stop. And it seems like it doesn't take very long, and what he ends up with is a number of young men that were noble born or of prestigious families, and also a bunch of stuff from the temple too.
What's interesting is that I think it's Jeremiah, I don't remember right off, that tells us that Nebuchadnezzar actually stopped, and he took some time, a little bit, not much, but a little bit of time praying to his gods, should I or shouldn't I? Should I or shouldn't I? Should I take Jerusalem now? Should I go back to Babylon and ascend to the throne? And he did like 3 or 4 things within his pagan rituals, and they all pointed to start taking Jerusalem. Show your power right now.
Yeah, and I think you even called it like a slap in previous, right?
Yeah.
It's not like he went in and destroyed everything.
Nope, not at all.
He went in and strategically cut out some people. A lot of people think that that these young men were then hostages that went back.
Yep.
And I'm sure they also levied a tax on the people too. Hey, you guys are going to start paying the tax to us.
Yeah, so now the southern kingdom of Israel, which is called Judah, which contains Jerusalem, is no longer being oppressed by Egypt, or Assyria, because Babylon has taken over both of those world empires, but now is a subsidiary or a province within Greater Babylonia.
Now you get to pay tax to
Now
us.
you get to
You're
pay
still
your
paying
taxes
taxes.
and
Who are you going to pay it to?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So he goes back home and and he takes Daniel with him.
Yeah.
Now from the king's standpoint, he'll come back to Jerusalem 2 more times, and the second time is when he either puts everybody to death or he's bringing more people back.
Yeah, bringing more. Ezekiel actually comes back to Babylon in the second one, and during this time he's installing puppet kings who are supposed to, in Jerusalem, who are supposed to report to him. The third time then, about 20 years after what we're seeing in Daniel, the third time is when he finally destroys Jerusalem, destroys the temple, and that's the last one, and for, quite some time.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, because when you hear that, it's like, why did God leave Israel? And the opposite is what happened, right?
Yeah.
Israel left God.
Right.
Right. And really because God just kept saying, don't do it. Here's what's going to happen. Here's what's going to happen.
Yeah, and in fact, in the book of Jeremiah, God specifically says, you guys are going into exile for 70 years, which when we get to Daniel 9, he reads that, recognizes that 70 years is almost up, and he's like, all right, we got to
something's happening.
Be ready for this, right? Yep. Yeah. But so this is like, the book of Daniel lasts a long time if we're seeing 70 years.
From years.
Yeah.
And so the other I think, or another key point is the nation of Israel left God, but that doesn't mean individual people left.
Correct.
Right. So we'll see Daniel, and we'll see at least three of his friends still did their best to keep kosher.
Yep.
And all the laws that they were supposed to, sometimes under duress.
Yeah.
In there, and I think that's a big part of the book too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really big principle that we're going to see Daniel and others following through. And 650, 700 years later, the apostles Peter and John stood in Jerusalem, looked at the Sanhedrin, and said, "We must obey God rather than people." Daniel was doing that 7 centuries earlier. We must obey God rather than people. When society goes against God, when society requires us to violate biblical principle,
right,
we would rather be on society's bad side, the government's bad side, than on God's.
Right.
And we're going to see that play out many times here in the book of Daniel.
Yeah. So in chapter 1, it starts out, it's talking about Judah, and the reason it again is talking about Judah is the northern kingdom has been gone for over 100 years. We're just talking about the southern kingdom, a much smaller part. We see this short story of Nebuchadnezzar invading Jerusalem and taking people and treasures back, and guess who's with them, right?
Yep.
Daniel's one of the first ones taken.
Yeah.
So now we're back in Babylon, and the idea is the king is handpicking some of these people to set apart.
Yeah.
And I think you used the word indoctrination, and I think that's a great word. So now you have people of royal families, or you have the smart kids that you've taken, and you need to now Babylonialize them.
Yeah.
Making true. Up a word.
Yeah, no,
but
it's true.
Here's what we think is important. Here's the languages you need to learn.
Yep.
Here's what needs to happen in there. All while realizing, hey, these kids are smart.
Well, because he basically, this is not necessarily a promotion, but it's at least a lateral move, right? You were nobility back in Jerusalem. You're going to remain nobility, but I'm also going to put you to work.
Yep.
So there's education, there's schooling, there's training, there's whatever, and then they'll be, parceled out into whatever jobs that Nebuchadnezzar needs them to be in under his government as opposed to the Jerusalem government.
Yeah, so he says, all right, I need you for 3 years.
Yep.
We're going to teach you, and in return, you get to eat from the king's table.
Yeah.
Which really means they're going to be eating the same food and drinking the same wine that the king is.
Yeah, right
which
there.
is, one, an honor,
Yeah.
and two, man, I'm going to be able to eat for 3 years.
Right. Right.
I think what I called it is free room and board.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Because they're going through this training. They're going to, like you said, this Babylonianization, right? You eat what we eat. You drink what we drink. You speak the language that we speak. Yep. You read the books that we tell you to.
Oh, and by the way, we're going to give you some new names,
and
too.
We're going to give you some new names.
Yeah.
And the names is really a big deal. Because each of these four, Daniel and his 3 friends, there were more, but those 4 are named. Each of their names somehow links them to Jehovah, the true and living God. So Daniel, for instance, means, my judge is God, or God is my judge, right? But I like that. My judge is God. Yeah. Okay. Well, and he lives that out,
exactly.
Right?
Yep.
And Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah all have names that link to, especially that Ayah at the end. That's Yah. Yeah. That's God's name. Well, the names that they were given are all linked to pagan gods. They're similar to their Hebrew names. They weren't going to be hard to memorize for the most part, but they're linked to Babylonian gods, like Bel. Bel was one of the chief Babylonian gods, and so Daniel got the name Belteshazzar. Bel will protect type thing. Your God can't protect you. Your God couldn't protect you. My God will.
God can.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Daniel, right off the bat, causes trouble. Right? He decides, I don't want the king's food. I can't eat the king's food. So he and I'm assuming because it's not kosher.
It doesn't say
exactly
why, right?
Right. But he makes a deal with the official, and the official has a problem too, because the king said you're going to eat the food, and Daniel's saying, hey, give me some vegetables instead. And the guy's going, but you need to eat this food, and I'm going to get in trouble. Yeah. So Daniel says, I'll tell you what, for 10 days, let me eat this food. Yep. And then you judge whether I'm healthier than these other guys that are eating from the king's table. Yeah.
So now what's interesting
of a cool thing
is, most people think of Daniel and these guys as mid-teens, 14, 15, 16 years old. This isn't a 30-something-year-old negotiating a business deal. Yeah. This is a 15, 16-year-old just doing what he could to obey in a pagan land, in a foreign society, hoping that, he doesn't get his head chopped off tomorrow.
Right. Yeah. More, how do I get out of here? Than anything else.
When I was young, let me tell you, we had a pastor friend here in South Bend. Great guy, really, really, really liked him. And I was at my dad's shop one day, and Pastor Joseph was in there, and he looked at me. He's like, you need to memorize Daniel 1:8. That's your life verse. I'm like, okay. I'm right. Like, what am I? I'm, 10 years old or something. I don't remember. And Daniel 1:8 says, Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested, which is really interesting, of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. I did memorize it a long time ago. And that concept of he purposed in his heart, I can't do this, so I'm going to request from the person in charge. And he did it with respect, and he had, honored the authority. But he's not just like, I'm not going to eat your food. It's, this is going to hurt me. This is going to defile me is there another option?
Yeah.
And I think that's a great place to start.
Yep.
And he was living out his namesake. Listen, my judge is God. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I stand before God.
Yeah, and if you haven't figured it out, God is just interwoven
all the
way through.
Yeah.
So in verse 17 says, "Now as for these 4 young men, God endowed them with knowledge and skill in all sorts of literature and wisdom. And Daniel had insight into all kinds of visions and dreams."
Which is interesting,
so
because
kind of setting it up.
So this, we don't really hear this word much until, except Christmas time, okay? But in Matthew chapter 2, the Magi come to see the Christ child type thing, right? Well, Magi is a loan word from Persia, which was the nation that defeated Babylon, and it's where we get our word magic and magician. Every ruler back then, every king had his trusted counselors who worked in the dark arts, who worked in the magic.
Right.
That's what these guys were being trained for. And so specifically this concept of visions and dreams and all this stuff, that Daniel is the most famous. The Magi is plural. Magus, Magus. Daniel is the most famous of the Magi in all of Scripture. Maybe second only, if you want to, but by name, definitely first. You got the Magi who come to see Jesus, but you also have the magicians of Pharaoh at Moses' time.
Right.
It's all the same guys. It's all the same class of people anyway.
Right.
Daniel was one of those guys.
Yep.
As a teenager.
Yeah, and we learned a little more about him a little bit later here too.
Yep.
Yeah. So the king has a dream. So in chapter 2, and here's the cool thing, right? So as king, you get to set out what the rules are, and his rules are: okay, I need somebody to tell me what my dream was and what it means.
Right.
And they're like, "We'll tell us the dream, and we'll tell you what it means." No, you don't get me. And he's talking about the seers and the magi, and there's the satraps, and there's a whole bunch of names that he's using. All these guys, one of you needs to tell me, or you're all gonna die.
Yep. And let me point out that in chapter 2, verse 1, it says that it's the second year of his reign. So we're only if he took Daniel
of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Yeah.
So if he took Daniel back and these guys back, like on day 1, we're in the second year. These guys are still only 16, 17 something years old.
Yeah, really good point.
Okay.
Really good point. So Daniel figured out, he got wind of this, that this is going to happen.
He wouldn't have been, he's still in school. He wouldn't have been there to hear it firsthand, right?
Right. And by the way, you're slated to be killed.
Yeah.
Hey, okay.
What was 7th hour again?
Yeah. So he asks his friends to pray for him, and he has a vision that night, and the dream was revealed to him. So it was like, hey, now I got to get in front of the king.
Yeah.
Which again, 16-year-old getting in front of,
and he can't just walk in.
Yeah. So Daniel correctly tells the king what the dream is and the meaning and the meaning of it. Let's see, is that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
it was a statue,
Yeah.
and God was telling, what Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar was, God is telling you what is going to happen in the future. This is that little bit of predictive prophecy in the first half. And it was a statue that had 4 different types of metals, and you'll be able to read it. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but he said, you are the head of gold. And then there's going to be a nation that conquers you, and a nation conquers them, and a nation that conquers them. When you look at this, we'll see this again in chapters 7 and 8. But we see that Babylon is first, was conquered by Persia, was conquered by Greece, was conquered by Rome. Those are the 4 nations that they're not named here.
Right.
But they will be named. Some of them will be named later.
But here they're different parts of the body, and also a different metal.
Different metals, different precious
yeah.
metals, and it works from gold at the top to iron, and ultimately iron
Sand,
mixed with
right?
clay.
Yeah, clay. Right.
In down at the bottom.
Right. So this gets destroyed.
Yeah.
Right, by a stone that was cut by no
Without
human hands.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So there's this boulder that runs down the mountain and knocks over and destroys all of these kingdoms, all of these nations. And again, this will be elaborated on in the second half of the book. But we see this as Messiah's kingdom. Jesus ultimately, his kingdom will take out all of everything that came before it.
Right. So Daniel not only described the dream accurately, also explained what it was.
The interpretation.
And what did Nebuchadnezzar do?
He was thoroughly impressed.
Yeah. As well he should be.
As he should be. And he made Daniel the second in command over, or at least in command over all of the magicians and the wise men and everything.
Yeah. So how do you think those wise men felt? Right? You got a kid coming in 1 year out of some hick town.
Yeah. And he's only in his second year of training.
That's
he
what
hasn't
I mean.
even figured out his training.
He's still learning the language. And now he is over.
He's your boss.
Yeah, right. So there has to be
17-year-old or whatever.
Now, on one hand, he saved your life.
Yeah.
So, but on the other hand, man, there had to be a lot of resentment in there.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So, Nebuchadnezzar has this idea. He's like, well, in my dream, there was a statue, and I'm the head of gold. What if I just make a whole statue out of gold? Or at least overlaid, if not out of gold completely. And that brings us to chapter 3.
Yeah, so in chapter 3, well, interestingly enough, Daniel didn't even show up in chapter 3.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird, right?
Everybody has their opinion why he was not there. I think that the statue and the music and everything was a test of loyalty, of allegiance. And there were certain people that Nebuchadnezzar just didn't figure he had to test. And Daniel's got to be one of them, right? He just did it,
Yep. All right, so the king makes a golden statue 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide, which to me is a monolith, right? Which are, I don't know, common during that time.
Yeah.
But, something really big and tall, and you got a bunch of people that have to lift it up and put it in place. But somebody comes up to him and says, hey, these Jewish guys over here, they're not
bound down to it.
Yeah, and you ought to keep your eye on them.
Yeah.
So the king, as you can imagine, he was pretty ticked off.
Yep.
And goes over to them and says, hey, what's the deal?
Mm-hmm.
He didn't wait for it to happen. He just went and asked what would happen. And they said, we can't bow down to it.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah, so kind of cool from the standpoint of Daniel displayed those characteristics, and now we're seeing them from other people too.
Yep.
Which is awesome.
Yep. And he made this big law that anybody who doesn't bow down is going to be thrown into the fire.
Right. And they ticked off the king enough that the king not only had the fire in there, but it was 7 times hotter. Than it normally is.
Yeah, turn it up.
And so the guards and going to throw these guys into the fire, and the guards perish before they even get to the fire. The fire was so hot.
Yep. The most important part of this chapter is not what most people think it is, though. Most people think it's the part where they don't burn up and they come out. That's not the most important part. The most important part is in verses 15 and 15 through 17, or 15 through 18.
Wait. Okay, I didn't know, but is it, hey, how many people did we put in there?
Nope, it's not that one. It's not that one either. This is before that. This is before they get thrown in.
Oh, okay.
The most important part is when Nebuchadnezzar looks at these guys and says, so who is that God who can rescue you from my power? And they're like, ooh, I know this one. I know this one. And they said, listen, we serve this God. And if he chooses to save us from this, that's great. We will honor him. And if he doesn't, it doesn't matter. We're still not going to obey you.
Yeah.
And that's when he got really ticked off and everything. I think
but how true is that from our standpoint?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's what you were talking about. If there's a law made that goes against God, that's kind of where we need to be.
Yeah.
That kind of.
Yeah. Now society is going to go away from God. Society is going to do all sorts of things
Right.
And they're going to say we should, but we don't have to, right? But once that law is made, you must do this. At that point, we stand up and say, no, we can't.
Right.
And whatever the consequences are.
Right.
You know, these guys, they literally were looking at their lives and they said, our God can save us from this. Our God is bigger than you are, buddy.
Yep.
But even if he doesn't, we will not bow down. And we're telling you that right now.
Right. It's an easy thing to say, except when it's your life that's on the line.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
You have no concept of what that would be then.
Yep.
All right. So what happens?
Well, he throws them in the fire. And like
Right.
you said, it was so hot that the guys who threw them in died. Right. And they were walking around in there. That God miraculously preserved them, saved them.
And then the funny line where Nebuchadnezzar goes, wait, didn't we throw in 3? How come I see 4
There's
in
4
there?
guys in.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of a translation thing. Literally what he said was, I see someone like a son of the gods. He didn't say, I see the son of God in there. Some people read that, oh, Jesus was in there. Was it Jesus? It could have been, right?
Right.
Was it an angel? We don't know. But he certainly wasn't thinking son of God like we use that term.
Right.
A son of the gods, some kind of angel protector or whatever. We don't know. But there was somebody in there with them, protecting them. They came out. He called them and they walked out. And it says that their clothes weren't singed. Their hair wasn't singed. They didn't smell like smoke. Nothing. I mean, God didn't just protect them. He protected everything on them.
Right. So I think it's interesting that Nebuchadnezzar realized that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the miracle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then what did he do?
Well, because the question is, what God can protect you from my power? And they're like, ours can.
Yeah.
And then he saw it happen.
And he saw the proof.
And so what he did is he made a public announcement that their God is now one of the official gods in Babylon that nobody's allowed to slander. This must be a pretty cool dude. He's definitely strong. He didn't believe in him. Not like he was saved or anything, you know.
Not that he would have been
but he
Christian,
just added him to the list of Babylonian gods that nobody is allowed to slander on fear of death. Okay, here's one more to add to the list. Oh, another god that we can't slander, type thing. That's sort of what it was. But it impressed him enough to add him to the list.
Yeah. Well, and he recognized it too. So just trying to give him a little credit.
Yeah.
In there.
Yeah. Now, chapter 4, we'll see a completely different way of acknowledgement, but he's on the right track. In chapter 1, we have Daniel pushing back a little bit, and Nebuchadnezzar's like, that's interesting. In chapter 2, we have the vision and the dream and everything. Yeah. He's like, wow,
now you have my attention.
Now you've got my attention.
Yeah.
And now in chapter 3, he's like, your God, obviously, is bigger than I thought.
Right.
So we're seeing a progression as we go through this.
Yeah. So what happens next?
Dun, dun, dun. We'll be back next week with that, but hopefully,
cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, hopefully you this is drawing you in, and we've had an opportunity to share some thoughts that maybe you haven't thought of the same way, and you've found it useful. If you have, please let us know. If you have questions, let us know those as well. And we'll be back next time with the second half of the first half, I think.
Chapter 4.
Chapter 4 through 6 next time. See you then.
Bye.